Welcome back, capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Today we are going over our week 1 preview. It is the biggest week of the year. We've already covered the games for today and yesterday. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram to stay up to date with those early week predictions. Links to those will be in the description. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe. It helps us out a lot. And without further ado, let's jump right into this week's preview. Starting with the week 1 schedule, and boy is it something. Over 69 games this week. Nice. We're not going to list off every one, but they will all be flashing up on the screen for you. We're here to point out the most interesting matchups. Starting with the very first one, Clemson and Georgia facing off in Atlanta. We'll be looking a bit closer at that one in a minute. Another one we'll be looking closer at is West Virginia versus Penn State. A pretty big game for both teams. Both fan bases think they have it locked down, so it'll be interesting to see who's right. Another one that jumps out to us is South Dakota State at Oklahoma State. The Jackrabbits are a great FCS program, and Oklahoma State was a team last year that was prone to an upset or two. Their northern counterparts in North Dakota State just brought it to the wire against Colorado. Very interesting game. Will be interesting to see if Alan Bowman has what it takes to take control, keep the ball away from the Jackrabbits, and lead the Cowboys to the W. Miami at Florida is another game we'll be looking at in this video. Boise State at Georgia Southern is a very interesting group of 5 matchup. Georgia Southern is a big underdog at home. We think a lot of people are sleeping on the Eagles this year. We don't have a best bets segment yet. A little bit of foreshadowing there, but if we did, we'd say Georgia Southern covering here is a pretty good one. And another group of 5 Power 4 crossover game to watch is Western Kentucky at Alabama. Alabama should win and cover, but it will be Kalen DeBoer's first game as Alabama's head coach. There's probably nothing to worry about, but Western Kentucky is a pretty solid group of 5 program. They're going to give you a fight, and if for some reason DeBoer didn't get the Tide up to speed this offseason, it could get very interesting very quickly. Think Alabama versus USF last year. And 2 more games we'll be looking at later on are Notre Dame at Texas A&M and Fresno State at Michigan. And UCLA at Hawaii is a fun one to look at. Hawaii did pretty good against Delaware State last week. I mean, it was Delaware State and the team missed their flight to the game, but the Rainbow Warriors still looked good in that game. And it's UCLA's first year under new coach Deshaun Foster. They didn't have a great offseason. That roster isn't looking amazing. And on top of all of that, the game is in Hawaii. We'll talk a little bit more about that game later. Wyoming at Arizona is another upset watch type of game. A little spoiler alert with those last 2. And then we have LSU versus USC in Las Vegas on Sunday night. And to cap it off, we have Boston College at Florida State on Monday. And with that out of the way, let's get into our big impact matchups. The first has to be Clemson and Georgia in Atlanta. A neutral site game, but Athens is a little bit closer to Atlanta than Clemson is. So probably going to be a few more Bulldog fans there than Tiger fans. Should be a great battle between 2 amazing defenses. But on the other side of the ball, one side looks far superior than the other. For the Tigers, if Klubnik really is what you think he is, he's going to have to become that in this game. He's been okay in his first couple of seasons, but okay isn't going to beat Georgia. They need to be a few steps above that if they want to win this one. And as for Georgia, they have all the pieces necessary to put together a win here. It'll just be a matter of staying consistent. Don't underestimate this Clemson defense. They're going to be one of the best you see all season long. And if you come out walking, you'd be surprised at how long Clemson can hang around. So to Kirby, I know you're watching. I know you need our advice here. Just don't underestimate that Tiger defense. Our next matchup is going to be Penn State at West Virginia. This one is going to be electric. 2 elite fan bases. Will be a great home crowd to open the season in Happy Valley. And Penn State is a bit of a question mark heading into this season. A lot of people think they can make the jump and become a Big Ten championship contender. And if you're basing that off their defense, you'd be absolutely correct. They'll field an elite defense this year, should be very good at every level, but the offense will be unpredictable once again. Penn State brings in a new offensive coordinator and a new wide receiver one, but they bring back the same Drew Aller. Aller is a lot like Klubnik in that they were both very hyped up prospects coming out of high school that for one reason or another haven't really lived up to that hype. Aller is not bad by any means, but the offense has revolved around the run game the past couple seasons, something you wouldn't expect to hear after bringing in a 5-star quarterback. But that is it for Penn State. For West Virginia, you're looking at a much more balanced team. They're solid on both offense and defense, have some pretty good skill position talent, have some pretty good defensive talent. Nothing too crazy, but they do return Garrett Green as their starting quarterback, and he is very dynamic, very versatile, can hurt you on the ground and through the air, but he was almost their whole offense last season, and he's going to have to put the team on his back and lead West Virginia once again if they want to leave with a home win versus the Nittany Lions. And next up in our big impact matchups, we have the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame going to College Station to take on the Texas A&M Aggies. Texas A&M has had to undergo a very mini rebuild this offseason. We say very mini because they did away with Jimbo Fisher, they brought in Mike Elko, and although they lost some big names like Evan Stewart and Walter Nolan to the transfer portal, they were able to retain a healthy amount of talent from the last couple recruiting cycles, and we think Elko is going to be able to get Texas A&M heading in the right direction. They'll return Connor Wigman at quarterback, who looked very good last season before going out with an injury, unfortunately. And the sky is truly the limit for the Aggies as a whole on both sides of the ball. They've had the talent to be an SEC contender and even a national title contender. And we think Elko is going to be able to push those guys to reach that potential, or at least come a little bit closer than the last regime did. And on the other side, we have Notre Dame, led by Marcus Freeman, who is entering his third full season as their head coach. Notre Dame has been one of our highest rated teams coming out of this offseason, to mixed opinions from our fans, we'll just say. That's because we think Freeman has done an amazing job so far at Notre Dame. He's brought in a bunch of talent through high school and through the portal, namely their new starting quarterback, Riley Leonard. Leonard comes from Duke in a move that reminds us exactly of the Irish's last quarterback, Sam Hartman, but will hopefully work out a bit better than Hartman did at Notre Dame. He wasn't nearly as good as a lot of people thought he would be, including us. But what will help Leonard out a lot this year is not only the very solid skill position talent he'll have at Notre Dame, but the defense at Notre Dame. It's a very scary one this year, one of our top defenses we've rated this entire offseason, and if they can live up to the hype that we're giving that unit, it should be the deciding factor in a lot of Notre Dame's games this year. And for our next matchup, let's look at a more unorthodox pick. We'll be looking at Fresno State going to Ann Arbor to take on the Michigan Wolverines. And we talked earlier about that Western Kentucky and Alabama matchup, but this to us feels like that one on steroids. Pretty similar games, but we think Fresno State will be a much better group of 5 opponent, and more importantly, we think Michigan will be a lot more volatile this season. The Wolverines lost a solid majority of their coaching staff and roster this past offseason, so they're coming in with a whole new team, with a whole new coach, and a whole new starting quarterback in Alex Orji, and we're getting mixed signals from him early, especially since it took Sharon Moore so long to officially announce him as their starter. Could be nothing, but doesn't give us a lot of confidence in Orji as a true quarterback one. And him, as well as the offense, will be the biggest question mark for the Wolverines this year for obvious reasons, but the defense should not be a worry at all. They retain a ton of key talent from that unit, and they're still going to match up well with most of their opponents on that side of the ball this year. But Fresno State is going to be a sneaky good team this year. watch out for them in the Mountain West. They were that much last year, and from that 2023 team, they return Mikey Keene, who was a solid starter, who was a solid starting quarterback for them last year, as well as their leading rushers and Malik Sherrod and Elijah Gilliam. And honestly, they just look good all over the board. Not bad in any unit, but obviously a group of 5 team, going to be a little bit less talented by nature. They return a lot of talent on both sides, and they're going to be one of the best teams in the Mountain West this year, and they're not going to allow you to overlook them. Best believe the Bulldogs are going to take it to the Wolverines this week. Should be a very interesting matchup. And next we have our Sunday night matchup in the LSU Tigers taking on the USC Trojans in Las Vegas. LSU is coming in with a very solid team all around. They had a great, strike that, elite offense last year led by Heisman winner Jaden Daniels, who is now gone. And Garrett Nussmeier is the one replacing him, which should hurt them in all honesty. Daniels was a freak athlete, 1,000-yard rusher to go along with a great passer, which is why he won the Heisman, but Nussmeier is a more than capable starter. And overall, the offense should be very good once again. It'll just be a matter of how much the LSU defense can improve this year. They were good and bad at times last season, more bad than good most of the time. But they bring in former Missouri defensive coordinator Blake Baker to take over and mold that defense into a much better unit than they were a year ago. And they had talent as a unit last year. We think they just needed a bit more leadership, and Baker is going to provide that for them this season. And similarly, on the opposite side, the USC Trojans also experienced a ton of defensive woes last year, but they bring in Deanton Lynn to be their next defensive coordinator in one of the most underrated moves this offseason. Lincoln Riley recognized that he hasn't been able to get it done on that side of the ball, and he brought in the guy from Pasadena, the former Bruin, to come in and hopefully fix that unit as much as he can in one off season. And like we said, Lincoln Riley is still their head coach, so they're going to have a great offense led by Miller Moss at quarterback. Haven't seen much from him in his career, but if the Riley method remains true, he should be just fine. And last in our big impact matchups, we'll be looking at the Boston College Eagles taking on the Florida State Seminoles. A matchup we probably wouldn't be looking at if not for the shocking upset loss Florida State suffered just a week ago in Ireland. And unlike the other teams on this list, we've actually seen them play this year. We have a generally good idea at what the team will look like, and they could be in trouble again this week. If you remember all the way back, Georgia Tech was able to rush for nearly 200 yards on the Seminoles, and they really just couldn't figure out how to stop it. And the reason we're bringing this up is because Boston College had one of the biggest volumes in terms of running the football last year. Their quarterback, Thomas Castellanos, ran for over 1,000 yards, and their lead running back went for over 750, and that should make you shudder if you're a Seminoles fan. Not only an effective rushing attack, but a quarterback who can run it too. It's not all bad for the Seminoles though. Boston College isn't nearly the team that Georgia Tech is all around. And for DJ, he'll have a lot more comfortability in that Seminole backfield. The Eagles have a lot less to work with in terms of pass rush. So it should be an interesting matchup, but one side is going to be clearly favored over the other. And for the O&O Sports Game of the Week, let's take a look at a game in the swamp. It's going to be the Miami Hurricanes going to Gainesville to take on the Florida Gators. And both of these teams are going to be fairly even this year, but looking at last year's stats, Miami was 38th in the country in points per game, 32nd in yards per game, 48th in points allowed, and 26th in yards allowed per game, and 93rd in turnover margin, compared to Florida, who was 62nd in points and 47th in yards per game. 85th and 91st in points and yards allowed per game, and 96th in turnover margin. Miami clearly has the edge there, and they bring in a number of key transfers to bolster their defense and skill positions. But Florida is no pushover. They also add key talent in those areas. And for our players to watch in this matchup, for Florida, it'll be Graham Mertz, the starting quarterback. He was very dependable in his first year in Gainesville last year. He threw for nearly 3,000 yards, 20 touchdowns, and only 3 interceptions with a 72.9 completion percentage. Very accurate, very underrated. But on the other side, for Miami, we have the transfer quarterback Cam Ward, who respectfully blows Mertz out of the water in terms of stats. He threw for 800 more yards and 5 more touchdowns, but with a few extra interceptions and a bit worse completion percentage. 2 great quarterbacks by all means, and they're going to be taking on 2 defenses that are both heavily underrated heading into this season. And before we get into our predictions, let's take a look at our upset watch teams. Our good friend Todd is debuting his newest invention. It's going to be his upset rating system, and how this is going to work is Todd is going to give us a few of his potential upset matchups, and he's going to rate them on a scale of 1 to 10 for us, 1 being the least likely for an upset and 10 being the most likely. And let's start with our first matchup. It's going to be the Wildcats of Northwestern taking on Miami of Ohio at home. Miami was a great team last year in the MAC conference, and likewise Northwestern was not bad at all. But Todd here thinks Northwestern could be in for a bit of a sophomore slump season under David Braun. And when you pair that with a Miami of Ohio team that we are predicting will win the MAC conference this year, you have a recipe for big upset potential. And with that said, we have the Wildcats rated at an 8 on the upset rating scale. Pretty high, but obviously not the worst situation for the Wildcats. Following them, we have a similar situation in the Arizona State Sun Devils versus the Wyoming Cowboys. Wyoming in the Mountain West, they were also a very good team last season. We could essentially hit copy and paste from the last matchup onto this one, but the biggest difference is that Arizona State is a considerably worse team than the Wildcats, and that by proxy means we have them rated even higher at a 9 on the upset scale. We are in the red alert danger zone. I repeat, the red alert danger zone for this matchup. We'll have our eyes glued to this one. And following Arizona State, we'll look at a team we mentioned earlier. It is the UCLA Bruins as they travel to Hawaii. Hard to say just how UCLA will look this year. We aren't super confident in them, but it is Hawaii, as good as they look against FCS Delaware State. And UCLA should pull this one out, but with the uncertainty surrounding the program and surrounding Deshaun Foster's approach he's bringing to UCLA, we feel like we need to have this one on upset alert. We'll be ranking it a little bit lower though. We have this matchup listed as a 6 on the upset scale. And last on upset watch, we have the Florida State Seminoles. We had to do it. Sorry, Seminoles fans, but until your guys prove they can come off this watch list, we're gonna have them here. We talked about this matchup at length already, so no need to rehash it. We think it's worthy of watching, but we aren't confident in Boston College enough as a program to have our upset rating number any higher than a 3 out of 10. And without further ado, let's jump right into our big game predictions. Here are the games we've talked about in this episode. Let's start with Clemson and Georgia. We think Clemson could be significantly better than they were last year, especially if they can get just a little bit better on offense. But we think Georgia has too much firepower for the Tigers to hold down for 4 quarters. We have it close in the first half, with the Bulldogs pulling away late to solidify the W, with the final score being 31-17 Bulldogs. And next we have Penn State at West Virginia. And listen, West Virginia fans, we love you guys. Please don't hate us, but we are much more confident in Penn State overall than West Virginia this go around. We think you guys are a program on the rise. We're excited for your season, But in this matchup, we have the Nittany Lions winning 21-16. Following that one, we have Notre Dame at Texas A&M. We think this could be a gritty matchup and a pretty underrated quarterback duel. Probably not a ton of fireworks in this one, but both Leonard and Wigman are guys that can hurt you deep. Both defenses are solid, but we think only one of those defenses are truly elite. And that is why we have the Fighting Irish going over the Aggies 34-21. Following that, we have the Wolverines of Michigan taking on the Bulldogs of Fresno in Ann Arbor. And while we did say this matchup could be fairly interesting, we have a lot of confidence in Michigan's defense compared to Fresno's. And ultimately, we have the Wolverines going over the Bulldogs at home 38-17. Next, we have Sunday night capital F football. It's LSU and USC in Vegas, and we're putting all our chips on black. And by black, we mean LSU. We think LSU is in a better place overall than USC is. They had a lot less mistakes to fix this offseason. Their offense will be good enough to go toe-to-toe with Lincoln Riley's if things get out of hand. But we think the Tigers will be able to hold the Trojans to 24, with the Tigers scoring 28. And next we have our upset watch team, the Florida State Seminoles, and thankfully for them, they won't be in Ireland this go around. We think the matchup with Boston College being a high volume run team is pretty intriguing, but ultimately we think Florida State is going to be the better team here. They'll be at home, and we think at home they'll go over the Eagles 31-21. And in our game of the week, we have the Miami Hurricanes on the road versus the Florida Gators. We think both of these teams are fairly even. Florida probably won't have the season we think Miami could have, just because their schedule is a lot less lenient. We'll just put it that way. But Florida is not a bad team. They should be a lot better than they were even 1 year ago. But we think Cam Ward at Miami is going to be a special combination. We think that's going to be evident in game one. We think it could be a back and forth game early, maybe even well into the second half. But we think the multifaceted passing attack that Miami will bring to the table will help the Hurricanes go over the Gators with a final score of 30-24. That's going to wrap up this week's season preview. If you enjoyed it, like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the recap.